Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen and enjoy my stories every day. It was just past midnight when the sound of a key turning in the front door brought Martin abruptly out of his uneasy slumber. He blinked against the dim light filtering through the blinds, casting long shadows across the living room where he had been waiting. His wife, Lydia, had been coming home increasingly late from work these past few weeks, her excuses flimsy and rehearsed. Tonight, Martin decided he couldn't ignore his suspicions any longer. The door creaked open, and Lydia slipped inside, her face flushed, a mix of the cold and, perhaps, something more secretive. She didn't notice Martin at first, busy as she was shrugging off her coat and kicking off her heels. "Lydia," Martin's voice was calm, almost too calm. Lydia jumped slightly, her hand clutching her chest. "Martin. What are you doing sitting in the dark? You scared me." "Couldn't sleep," Martin said, his voice steady. "You're late again." "Yeah, I had to close up the office tonight." "You know how it is," Lydia replied, avoiding his gaze as she hung up her coat. Martin watched her, the air thick with tension. "I thought I'd meet you at your office tomorrow. Surprise you. Maybe we could grab dinner together, downtown." Lydia's face tightened for a split second before she masked it with a smile. "Oh, that's sweet, but it's really not necessary." "I want to," Martin cut in firmly. "It's been a while since we did something nice together." "Sure," she conceded, sounding less than enthusiastic. "We'll see." Martin couldn't shake off the gnawing feeling in his gut as he watched Lydia disappear into their bedroom. He knew something was off. The late nights, the evasiveness, the subtle shifts in her behavior, it all added up to something he dreaded to admit. The next day, Martin left work early and drove to Lydia's office. He parked across the street, his heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. He watched as employees trickled out of the building, recognizing a few of Lydia's colleagues. Then he saw them. Lydia and an older man, whom he recognized as her former boss, Mr. Harrow. They stood too close, laughing at something on his phone. Martin's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he watched Mr. Harrow lean in, his hand brushing Lydia's arm with familiarity. Martin's breath caught in his throat as Mr. Harrow whispered something in Lydia's ear, and she laughed, her head thrown back in genuine amusement. It was a laughter Martin hadn't heard in months. The sight twisted his heart painfully. Suddenly, Mr. Harrow's actions confirmed Martin's worst fears. He watched, frozen, as the man kissed Lydia, not a peck of a goodbye, but passionately, possessively. Lydia did not pull away. Instead, her arms went around him, pulling him closer. Martin felt something within him snap. The betrayal was stark, laid out in front of him in the waning daylight. He sat there, unseen, a silent witness to his crumbling marriage. As they finally parted ways, Lydia glancing around guiltily before heading to her car, Martin's mind raced. "Revenge," a dark whisper suggested. "Ruin her as she has ruined you." With a heart heavy with grief and anger, Martin started the engine. His decision was clear. He would confront Lydia tonight, and it would be the end of everything they had built together. The consequences of her actions would be dire, and Martin felt no inclination to offer mercy. As he followed at a distance, watching Lydia's car weave through the traffic, Martin's mind was a turmoil of plans and dark thoughts. Tonight, everything would change, and there was no turning back. Martin's heart thumped painfully in his chest as he pulled into the driveway, trailing Lydia by only a few minutes. The cold evening air bit at his skin as he stepped out of the car and made his way inside their home, the scene of so many shared memories now tainted with betrayal. Inside, Lydia was in the kitchen, a glass of wine in hand, presumably trying to unwind after her day. The sight of her so relaxed, so normal, fueled Martin's simmering anger. "Lydia," he began, his voice cutting through the quiet of the room. She turned, a look of surprise fleeting across her features. "Martin, you're home early," she remarked casually, taking a sip of her wine. "Who is he, Lydia?" Martin's question was blunt, his eyes fixed on hers, searching for any flicker of guilt. Lydia's face fell, and she placed her glass on the counter with a clink. "What are you talking about?" "Mr. Harrow. I saw you two today." Martin's voice was steely, his stance firm as he watched her reaction closely. The color drained from Lydia's face. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice shaky. "Isn't it?" Martin challenged, stepping closer. "I saw you, Lydia. Don't lie to me." "It was a mistake," Lydia confessed, her eyes welling with tears. "It just happened." "I'm so sorry, Martin." "A mistake?" Martin scoffed, the hurt and betrayal mixing into a potent rage. "How long?" It started a few months ago." "I never meant for any of this to happen," Lydia pleaded, her voice breaking. Martin's mind reeled. Months. The deception had been going on for months under his very nose. He needed to get out, to think, to breathe. He turned on his heel and headed toward the door. "Martin, please, let's talk about this," Lydia called after him, but he was already out the door. Driving aimlessly, Martin's thoughts were chaotic. He ended up at his friend Tom's place, needing someone to talk to validate his feelings of anger and betrayal. Tom opened the door, his expression turning to one of concern at the sight of Martin's grim face. "Martin? What's wrong, man?" "It's Lydia," Martin said simply, and the words were enough. Tom led him inside, understanding the gravity of the situation. Over a few beers, Martin poured out everything, from his suspicions to the heartbreaking confirmation. Tom listened, his face a mask of sympathy and anger on his friend's behalf. "You need to think about what you want to do next, Martin. Are you thinking of leaving her?" Tom asked after a long silence. "I don't know. I can't think straight right now," Martin admitted, his voice hoarse. "I thought I knew her, Tom. I trusted her. It's a tough break, but you've got to face this head on. You might even consider getting some evidence if you think this might get legal," Tom suggested cautiously. Martin nodded slowly. "I might do just that. If I decide to go through with a divorce, I'll need all the help I can get." "Whatever you decide, I've got your back," Tom affirmed, clapping him on the shoulder. Returning home later that night, Martin was met with the silence of the house. Lydia was in the living room, waiting for him, her eyes red from crying. Martin steeled himself for a conversation that would decide the fate of their marriage. As he sat down across from her, ready to delve into the painful details, he knew this was just the beginning of a long, tumultuous journey. "Lydia, we need to talk," Martin began, his voice firm. "All of it, everything. Start from the beginning." As Lydia took a deep breath, ready to reveal the full extent of her betrayal, Martin prepared himself for the harsh truths to come. The night was long, and the conversation was only just beginning. The room felt colder than usual as Lydia began her confession. Her voice was low, filled with regret and something akin to fear. Martin sat opposite her, his face an unreadable mask, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. "It started as just late meetings, Martin. He was going through a rough patch, and I felt needed," Lydia's voice faltered. Martin's gaze didn't waver, absorbing every word, weighing them against his pain. "And then?" Martin prompted, his voice tight. "And then, one night, it just changed. It wasn't just talking anymore." Lydia couldn't meet his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Martin. I didn't know how to stop it." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of broken trust. Martin finally stood, pacing the room with a restless energy. "And you thought you'd never get caught? You thought I'd never find out?" "I don't know. I wasn't thinking," Lydia whispered, her voice barely audible. Martin scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. "Well, you should have. Because now, I need to think about what I want to do. Not just with our marriage, but how I handle this betrayal." Lydia's eyes followed him, tears streaming down her face. Please, Martin. I know I've made a terrible mistake. But I love you. I don't want to lose you. Martin stopped pacing and turned to face her. You should have thought of that before. His voice was cold, distant. I need some space. I'm going to stay with Tom for a few days. With that, Martin grabbed a bag and started packing a few essentials. Lydia watched him, paralyzed by the unfolding reality of their crumbling marriage. As Martin drove to Tom's place, his mind raced with possibilities. Anger, betrayal, and hurt battled with the remnants of love he still felt. At Tom's, he found not just a friend, but an ally ready to take action. First things first, Martin, Tom said as they sat down in his living room. You need to protect yourself legally and financially. I have a friend, Jenna, who's a lawyer. She's good, and she'll give it to you straight. Martin nodded. Set it up. I want to know all my options. The next day, Martin met Jenna at a coffee shop. She was sharp, with a no-nonsense demeanor that Martin appreciated in that moment. After hearing everything, you need to decide if you want to go the route of divorce. If so, gathering evidence of her affair will be crucial, especially if it comes down to settlements or alimony, Jenna explained, laying out the documents they might need. Martin listened intently, his mind made up about one thing: he couldn't just forgive and forget. What about surveillance? I need proof. Jenna nodded. I can contact a private investigator. They're discreet and can get you the evidence you need. Please, Martin confirmed, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow at the path he was choosing. Over the next few days, Martin stayed with Tom, trying to distract himself but often falling into periods of reflection. He thought about the good times with Lydia, now overshadowed by her deceit. When Jenna called to say they had solid evidence of Lydia's affair, something inside him felt vindicated yet broken. Armed with the evidence, Martin knew what he had to do. He called Lydia, asking to meet one last time. They chose a neutral location, a park they used to walk through in happier times. Sitting on a bench under the autumn sky, Lydia looked hopeful, maybe even expectant of reconciliation. Martin's expression, however, held no such promise. I have the evidence, Lydia. It's over, Martin said simply, handing her an envelope. I'm filing for divorce. Lydia took the envelope, her hands trembling. Martin, Save it, Martin interrupted, standing up. I needed closure, not excuses. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. Goodbye, Lydia. With that, Martin walked away, his stride firm, his heart heavy. Behind him, Lydia sat frozen, the sound of rustling leaves mingling with the echo of their fractured past. As Martin walked out of the park, the road ahead was uncertain, but he felt a resolve to rebuild, to find a future where trust might once again take root. A week after their last confrontation in the park, Martin was sitting in his temporary room at Tom's house, staring at the raindrops tracing paths down the window. The weather mirrored his mood, gray, unsettled, and murky. His phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Jenna, his lawyer. Martin, there's been a development. Jenna's voice was serious, yet there was a hint of confusion in her tone. Can you come to my office? It's important. Minutes later, Martin found himself across from Jenna in her stark, functional office. She handed him a file. We got the final report from the private investigator. There's something you need to see. Martin opened the file, his eyes scanning the documents quickly. Then, he froze. There were photos, yes, but also detailed reports of conversations that didn't just implicate Lydia. They involved Mr. Harrow, discussing not just an affair but a deliberate ploy. It seems, Jenna paused, choosing her words carefully, that Mr. Harrow was manipulating Lydia. He threatened her job, and there's mention of him using her to get to you. Martin looked up, confusion and anger mixing with a bitter sense of betrayal. Get to me? Why? Jenna leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. According to these conversations, Harrow held a grudge against you from your college days. It appears this was more about hurting you than it was about Lydia. The room spun slightly as Martin processed this information. His anger at Lydia, though not misplaced, was now tinged with a deeper, darker betrayal by someone he once called a mentor. I need to confront Lydia, Martin decided, standing up abruptly. I need the truth from her, face to face. Arranging a meeting with Lydia wasn't difficult. She looked worn, shadows under her eyes like bruises, her posture defeated. They met at a quiet coffee shop, away from familiar eyes. Lydia, Martin began, his voice steadier than he felt, I know about Harrow. I know he manipulated you. Lydia's eyes widened, and then, slowly, she nodded. I wanted to tell you, Martin. He threatened to ruin my career, said he would make sure I never worked in this field again if I didn't comply. Why didn't you come to me? Martin's voice cracked with a mixture of pain and residual anger. I was ashamed. And scared. I thought I could handle it, Lydia whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't want to drag you into this mess. I thought I was protecting you. Martin sighed deeply, the weight of their shared past pressing down on him. And so you chose to hurt me instead. I'm so sorry, Martin. Lydia reached out, but Martin pulled back. I believe you, he said finally, his decision clear in his mind. But it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change how we ended up here. Lydia nodded, tears streaming down her face. What will you do about Harrow? I'll deal with him through legal channels. Jenna's already preparing everything. And you, Martin paused, his heart heavy, you should fight back too. Don't let him destroy more lives. Lydia wiped her eyes, nodding. I will. Thank you, Martin, for understanding, at least a little. As Martin stood to leave, he felt a clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. Goodbye, Lydia. Take care of yourself. Walking away from the coffee shop, Martin felt the finality of their parting. There was no joy in the outcome, no satisfaction in the revelations. Only a deep, resolute desire to move forward, beyond the deceit and manipulation. Months later, news reached Martin that Mr. Harrow had been dismissed from his position, facing several lawsuits, including one from Lydia. Martin didn't feel vindication, instead, he felt a chapter closing, allowing him to finally step into a new, unburdened future. In the quiet of his new beginning, Martin realized that while the betrayal had scarred him, it had also shown him his own resilience and capacity for forgiveness, even if some relationships were meant to end, not with a dramatic clash, but with a quiet, dignified goodbye.